And once you've heard the stories, they stay with you, and you actually see the person through a different lens. It's like what Brene Brown says: it's hard to hate someone up close. So once you get to know up close and you get to hear their stories and you understand their context, it puts them in an entirely new light. And where that translates into is a far more productive work relationship.
Hi, my name is Anita Nowak, and I'm the author of this book. Welcome to Season 12 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Noah Godfrey, who is an entrepreneur and founder of the Real Human Project, a private podcast for teams to tell their stories and connect on a human level. Launched in 2020, his mission is to help cultivate more meaningful and productive relationships. Welcome to the show, Noah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm very excited about this. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is the Real Human Project? How does it work? The nuts and bolts, and then we'll ask why it's important.
Sure. So it's based on the insight that the highest performing teams are those that have high on the trust scale and on the empathy scale and on the psychological safety scale. And the Real Human Project aims to help organizations and their teams become a lot more productive and have better relationships through a private podcast. So what we do is we go to each organization. We start with one to three teams. We go to each person on that team, and we do a private podcast for each of those people. Each person gets their own episode about what makes them who they are. They're interviewed by a bot. Our bot, his name is Sam. So an AI, and that bot asks you questions all about the things that make you who you are. Some of those things are about work. Tell me about a time in work that you felt you really grew, or what do the people at work need to know to get the best out of you? Some of it's personal, stories about your parents or the neighborhood you grew up in, moments you struggled, moments you've really thrived and you found real fulfillment. Do you like cake or ice cream? All the important things in life that make you who you are. And it's a chance for people to tell their stories. And then we edit it down to a nice, succinct 20-minute episode where everyone has their own episode. And once they approve their episodes, they have full control over the content. They can skip questions and they can pause and think about their question. We edit it to make them sound their best authentic self. And then those episodes are shared amongst the teammates. Everyone gets a chance to listen. And then they leave a private voice reply, a private response back to the person whose interview it was, letting them know how their episode and how their stories resonated with them. And that's where the real magic happens. That validation, that I hear you, I feel you, I see you. Wow, I didn't know this about you. I now understand you better. And then after everyone listens, the teams often get together and have an in-person debrief, and we help them structure that as well. And then once one team does it in an organization, it tends to move to other teams as well, and they find it really easy makes it really easy when new teammates join, for onboarding and integrating new employees onto the team. They find it really useful for cross-functional work as they work in between teams, and just generally building a healthy culture of trust and empathy across an organization, which all the research shows leads to much better business performance, profitability, shareholder returns, everything.
Oh, so cool. Okay, so there's so many follow-up questions I have, because the first kind of reaction I had is an AI chatbot that's asking these questions. I mean, I guess we're hearing a lot about AI and ChatGPT, and so that's like out there. Obviously, this is another application. I have my own personal memory being at McGill at a conference where 200 faculty members were gathered to brainstorm what would be needed from a university in the year 2050, like what would students need in 2050? And the first presentation was a multidisciplinary team that brought a dragged a computer that was sitting on a table into the front of the room. And then one of the team members sat in front of it. They flipped on the computer became like this hologram. The researcher started sharing a story. The hologram responded, said, "So what I hear you saying is," and it was kind of like talking like a therapist. And the room literally, this is about, I don't know, 10 years ago now, the room split into two. You could hear the two sounds of gasps. One sound of gasp was like, "Oh, how cool." And the other sound was, "Oh my God, how terrible," right? Like it was really a complete bifurcation. And I continue to situate myself in the latter, where it's like, no, we can't have pixelated face pretending to be a therapist. But their feedback was, well, you know what? There's not enough therapists to go around for the need that exists. Don't we want to have at least, you know, a chatbot available when somebody's in a crisis? So I understand the application of all this AI, even though I feel like it's infiltrating sort of personal spaces. So here's an example where storytelling has been a profound and never changing human experience. We've been doing it since the dawn of time. It's so important to us. And yet it's a machine that we're talking to. So what do you say to the naysayers like me, like,
I don't blame you. So we started the Real Human Project with real life podcast hosts that would sit and interview people, and it worked. It was great. It was just we'd give them a list of questions, and sometimes they'd stick to the script, and we got great stories, and we went to go roll that out, and we could do that as a business. That would require us to charge several $1,000s an episode to produce and to make it happen. We now can produce an episode and charge $495 for an episode. So everyone gets their own episode for $495. And to be honest, the question was, when we first started tested, was, how much worse is this going to be?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be worse. How much worse is this going to be? And the answer, shockingly, is it's actually not worse. And in some cases, it's actually better. Mm. And the reason that is because we find that people feel comfortable, and sometimes even more comfortable, when there's not another human sitting there. So they ask a question, they're going to ask a question, and they can pause. And they can sit there, and sometimes they pause for 30 seconds or a minute, which is really hard to do in a live interview when someone's live is interviewing you. It's hard to skip a whole bunch of questions, saying pass. You feel rude. It's hard to start over again. And it's actually really easy to let your guard down when you don't feel like you're being judged in the moment. And so what we get are people who open up and they tell stories about things that they don't normally talk about. And when we ask them about it, say, like, you talked about this time where you had ovarian cancer in your 20s and how it completely changed the way you think about life. Is that something you talk about often? I say, no. We say, why? And they say, well, a couple of reasons. One, it's no one ever asks. And two, it's weird. It's weird for me. I feel awkward bringing that up in a conversation when I'm speaking to someone live, because now I'm putting my history, my struggles onto them, and they in the moment need to react with some sort of empathy or reaction, and sometimes that's putting them in an uncomfortable position. So what we found with the Real Human Project is, actually, by speaking to a bot, we have hacked human connection. We have found a shortcut for people to be open and vulnerable and safe, and for people to share their stories and tell their stories. And on the flip side, listen to those stories, because I'm listening to it asynchronously as well. You've told your stories. It's now in an episode. I'm listening while I walk my dog, or the comfort of my office or my home. And I don't feel I don't feel the need to react and show with facial expressions or with words in the moment how I feel. I can literally be in the moment and actively listen to that person's story, because I can't interrupt. So we found this this weird paradox, I should say, where you actually have asynchronous communication, where people feel safe in that private asynchronous space as a way to really create more meaningful human connection.
So have you tested out the idea of, doing like a screening where like a team will each have their stories recorded and then all of them are watched at the same time and everyone is around to watch them versus everybody going out and listening to them on their own?
Early stages. So it's a podcast. There's no video.
Oh, there's no
It's
video.
all just no video. People feel comfortable. It's a little easier when you're just producing audio. And it really is about the improving one-to-one relationships. So if you're a manager of a team and there are 6 people on the team, sometimes you think you're managing 6 individual people. Actually, you're managing 15 one-to-one relationships. And so what we aim to do is to strengthen, make more meaningful, make more productive each of those 15 relationships on a team, and then once that team does it across an organization. So the ability for people to actively listen on their own, in their own time, asynchronously, without other people around, where you're now thinking about how are they reacting? Should I be reacting? Like, that person's laughing, should I be laughing? We find that when you can fully focus on listening and being in the moment, we get the best results. Because at the end of the day, it's really just about building stronger relationships. And what we found is that people, what we see it with people who are new to a team, and they say to us, "I feel like I would have had to go out and have dinner and drinks for 2 years straight with this person to get the type of relationship and understanding and context I now have this person after a 20-minute episode." So we've really found a way to shortcut that getting to know you phase and that I really understand you phase.
So I can imagine on the heels of having heard these different stories, there's a little bit of a revelation, like, wow, I never knew that about that person. And then it kind of humanizes your colleagues and maybe even either a direct report or somebody that you supervise. What have people who have participated said maybe months later? Have you heard any anecdotal stories about how it's really changed the kind of culture or dynamics of the team?
Definitely, yes. So what we find is we get, and it's often from leaders or heads of human resources who say, we try these things, like we either go on and off site, or we do karaoke night, or ox throwing, or we do a ropes course, and it's fun the day of, but then there's a gravity to the situation. And months later, it doesn't, everyone's just kind of back to their old practices. And then they realize, they think to themselves, is that really a good use of our time? Was that really a good use of our money? For us, we find that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And once you've heard the stories, they stay with you, and you actually see the person through a different lens. It's like what Brene Brown says: it's hard to hate someone up close. So once you get to know up close and you get to hear their stories and you understand their context, it puts them in an entirely new light. And where that translates into is a far more productive work relationship. There's all that time that is spent questioning each other's motives or work. What happens when you have, you got it, I trust you, work gets done. Team meetings don't suck anymore. You actually walk to work, you wake up in the morning with actually a sense of like safety and levity, because you have this real deep connection with the people you work with, and you see them beyond their title. They're not just, head of product, or, senior engineer, or junior designer. They are, they are Anita. They are Noah. We are people.
How many questions are in your library of questions that your bot asks?
Thousands now. We now have thousands of questions in there. So every episode is different.
Okay,
There's
so
some that tend to overlap, and this started as Anita. This started as a side project right at the beginning of COVID. My business partners and I, we were just playing. It was the idea of what happens uh, if we just ask us like a random person some questions. Could we get to know them better? And it kind of started from the idea of, if I always thought it would be weird if I was trapped in an elevator with one of my favorite podcasters, because I would know them really well, but they'd have they know nothing about me.
mm,
So I thought, well, what would happen, if that was just a random person? Could we really get to know them really well? And so we hired a guy in Edmonton, Alberta, who was a podcaster, and got him to interview a guy who was a furniture maker. We gave him a bunch of questions. He kind of took it in his own direction as well. And the thought was, like, can we get this to work? And we tried it a whole bunch of times, and the answer was yes. It's amazing that when you ask the right questions and you make people feel safe and you encourage them to be vulnerable and you give them control over their own edit, that you can really get to know the nuts and bolts of someone. That sometimes there's people you've known for years, sometimes decades, and you still don't know them as well as you know them after a 20-minute Real Human episode.
well, I love this. I imagine that there's also applications within families, like multi-generational, and that you can start keeping films about all the aunts and the uncles and the grandparents. Is that starting to happen too?
It is. It is. I mean, what we noticed is that we happen to be focused on work teams, but but it works for any group of people. When you put people together in a room that have some sort of vested interest in each other, understanding each other on a more human level always helps improve those relationships and make them more meaningful. So whether that is a hockey team or a rock band or a family or a grade 9 classroom, or a team that's running a Fortune 500 company, they all need trust and safety and empathy, and you always get better results when you add that to the mix. It is trust and empathy is the silver bullet.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt a great conversation. I just want to draw attention to the fact that there are over 120 equally awesome conversations of my podcast and YouTube series on my channel. Please subscribe. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play. So let me ask you, as somebody who's now in this space, when you go to a cocktail party or you're meeting somebody for the first time, the typical question is, what do you do? Do you have any back pocket questions now from the work that you do that you find much more interesting?
I'm definitely more, I'm a better listener. To be honest with you, I think that part of this comes out of the fact that I'm not naturally empathetic. And I grew up in a family where it just, empathy wasn't the forefront of my life growing up. I'm very fortunate to marry a woman who is, says that she was raised by both her mother and Oprah. And I quote Oprah all the time, where everyone just wants to feel like they matter. And so it is absolutely incredible when you can go to a cocktail party or be in any sort of setting and actually get yourself into that mindset, of which I can sometimes. I still get stuck in my own ego sometimes, my own story in my own head. But the moments where you can let that go and truly have real purposeful empathy are the moments that are worth it, are worthwhile in life. And so I practice, but empathy is like a muscle. You gotta practice it. It's not, and for people like me, it just, I am not a natural empath, so I need to work at it, and I work at it because it is amazing. It is like the magic fairy dust.
So you've become a better listener as a result of this, but I'll just push you again. Are there a couple of favorite questions that your bot asks that you think are great openers?
I mean, to be honest with you, we open lightly. So we open with somewhat easier questions, often things that people can reach at quickly, often about childhood or family or the neighborhood they grew up in. That gets people talking and loose. I think we get great answers to questions like, tell me about a time in your life you found real fulfillment. Uh, I think we get great answers to times when we ask about um, things like, when's the last time you cried? Because you can see like people's real priorities in life. We get really good answers to who's the most successful person you know and why, because you can see them go through a process live as we speak to them, where they're immediate they immediately think, well, success is usually with money or some sort of material good, and then they stop themselves, and then they're as they define success in the moment, and then it turns into a very self-reflective uh, time where I think, well, this is how I'm living my life.
Mm.
So when people come out of their real human interview, we kind of go through phases. They go into the interview and they're feeling a little hesitant at first, a little skittish, like, what's this going to be? They come out of the interview, they love their interview, they actually find it almost therapeutic. They get a chance to talk about themselves for an hour that we end up cutting down to 20 minutes. And then they hear each other, and they thought the interview was good, but they love hearing each other and getting to know the ins and outs they would never would have heard. But then the thing that they love more than anything are the responses, the private responses. And to be honest, I expected when we first started doing responses, they'd be like a voicemail, 30 seconds, a minute. Oh, thank you for sharing, Anita. That was great. I didn't know that story about your mom. I also had a story, blah, 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 that sort of thing. We're now seeing 8 minutes, 9 minutes. There was a response left yesterday for 12 minutes long. People are sitting there and they're taking notes. They're enjoying they're really actively listening. And then they are connecting on a really deep level. Now, they're not all 12 minutes. Some of them are 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and that's totally fine too. But people are finding real meaning and purpose and connection through these responses, through these audio responses.
Okay, so I know that you are a serial entrepreneur. You had a prior business, sold it in 2015. I'm curious to know, because I always get asked the question. So my father asked me the question, why are you getting a PhD in empathy? Like, how are you going to get a job with that? And I have a hard time kind of thinking about the work of empathy building or human connection building in your case, and then sort of like putting that into the shape of a business model that monetizes, that scales, that becomes a sustaining thing. What do you say to people who are interested in your business? You're looking for investors, for example. What's the plan for this? I'm curious to know from the business side of things. And we may not put this in the final podcast. I might just ask, but let's see,
Yeah. So my philosophy on these sorts of things is, if you can create value, whatever you're doing, whether you're selling a widget or offering a service or putting together a platform for people to share their stories and get to know each other better, regardless of what you're doing, if you can create value and then you have some sort of model where you can capture yourself part of that value. So you've given value, people feel like they are happy to pay you because they're paying you a fraction of that value. And so you're sharing that value. And then you can provide that value for less resources, less money than the money that you're accepting. And so consequently, there's this value chain where everyone wins. That's the secret to a good business. And I think we have it here. I think we're building it. I will say, of all the things I've ever worked on in my life, and I've been very fortunate to work on things with some of the most talented people I can imagine. This has by far been the most meaningful and rewarding project I've ever been working on, and we're still like, it's still new. We're still like very early stage. We just started with our first handful of paid clients this year in 2023. So it's it's been a project for a few years, but it was a project that was a side project, a project of love, a project of passion, because I was curious, and my partners and I We were curious if there was a way to make the world and make if we can create that value, we can make things better. We truly feel that there's a crisis, a real dearth of human connection out there, and it's actually gotten worse. I think the technology that was meant to bring us together as humans has made it, in many ways, so far has made us feel more lonely and more apart than ever. And I think as humanity, that's a challenge for us. We are who we are as humans. We've become the dominant species on this planet because of our ability to collaborate. And our ability to collaborate is completely tied to our empathy, our ability to understand each other and work together. That's why we can sleep for 8 hours at night, because someone else is watching out for us. That teamwork, that empathy, that collaboration has made us the dominant species on this planet. But if we stop having empathy for each other, and we stop trusting each other, and we retreat into our silos, there's a real problem for humanity. But I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that this is just a bump in the road, and that we learn, and we learn from we learn from our mistakes, and we innovate, and we innovate our way out of problems. So I'm actually, despite the fact that I think we are in a crisis of trust, amongst maybe an economic crisis and coming out of a health crisis and maybe a social justice crisis, all these sorts of things, I'm so optimistic that we will innovate our way out of it. And I think we're going to innovate our way out of it through getting to know each other better, through trust, through empathy, through human connection, and because selfishly, that's what will make us survive and thrive as humans.
Well, I love this. If we could find a way to scale it, because I could just imagine whether or not it's a new person moving on to a new block that would have access to the library of neighbors. I could imagine it, new college students going into a dorm room, getting to know each other, like in a way that's not just a frosh when they're just putting down the beer bongs and stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of application. Obviously, you're speaking to a converted. I'm going to include all of your information in the description show notes, so people can learn more about this. Before I let you go, and I want to just thank you so much, Noah, for finding time today to have this conversation. I love ending all my conversations with my guests with the same question, and that is, can you think of a time when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yes. As a fan of your podcast, I knew this question was coming. I don't know if I've got a great answer, but I knew the question was coming. So I have 3 amazing kids. And when my oldest, Chase, she's now 16, but when she was a baby, 7 or 8 months old, there was, new parents, you're worried, you don't really know what's going on. Nothing about parenthood. But 7 or 8 months old, there was a moment where she just wouldn't stop crying. And it was unusual. We could tell she was in pain. There was something going on. It kept going on. We ended up taking her to the hospital. And I texted a friend of mine just to get some, which hospital do you think we should go to? He's a general surgeon. By the time he was a resident, he was a medical student resident working, 120-hour weeks, just not sleeping, working his butt off. So we went to the emergency room, and we're waiting there. And then all of a sudden, our friend Neil walked in, and he hasn't slept all week because he's a resident, but he walked in. This wasn't his hospital, but he walked in, and he's like, "I'm here. I got you." He put his hand on my shoulder, and I got to make sure I don't get choked up here, but he put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, "I got you, brother. I'm here." And he was not only a friend, but he was also like our advocate, because he understood, what was happening in the ER that night. He could help translate the back and forth, and he could put us at ease. He could tell us what was a big deal, what wasn't a big deal, what we should be nervous of. And he was just there. And to put yourself in the shoes of a new father, and my wife, a new mother, and then really show up really, when you haven't slept yourself, and just to be there for your friend shows real empathy. And I carry that with me because I think it's a lesson. I think in many ways, it's moments like that that have inspired me to like build this business, because that moment made me a better person, and made me conscious of the power of caring for others and thinking about others and getting out of your own head. And so yeah, it still, it sticks with me to this day. And he's still he's still one of my best friends.
That's a beautiful story. And shout out to Neil and your daughter, who's now, you said 16. Did we find out what the issue was?
I mean, they thought it could be something, but it turned out to be nothing. So
Good.
like, it would probably gas or I don't know. It was something that was, now it turns out to be nothing. So thankfully.
Well, blessings to all of you and your 3 children. Oh my gosh, I have one and I don't know how anybody has more than one, but anyways, I wish you nothing but success with this organization. I think what you're onto is really, really important. The Real Human Project. Learn about it here. Thanks, Noah. Thank you all for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. Thank you so much for watching an episode of Purposeful Empathy. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the channel and also consider picking up your copy of Purposeful Empathy. It's an invitation to dial up empathy in your life. The world needs more empathy. We need more empathy. What are you waiting for?